I think on the flip side of that, you may not even see the impact of the work that you're doing as an innovator in your lifetime. Like we've had, like Martin Luther King did not see the equity that he wanted in his lifetime, but he was such a visionary and an innovator to say, I'm going to continue to wake up and do this every single day, and hopefully, like this will happen. But now looking back, would anyone not say he's not a civil rights leader, even though he was widely not popular?
This is Innovation Currency. My name is Leigh-Ann Buchanan, and I am your host. What I want this podcast to help people see about themselves is that innovation is for everyone, and everyone is an innovator. I developed a simple test, a quiz, if you will, to help anyone discover their hidden innovation traits from across 4 specific domains: disruptor, connector, distributor, and influencer. If you haven't already taken the quiz, please stop, take a pause, and go by visiting my website, www.leighanbuchanan.com/innovator quiz.
We were talking before we started, and we're going to get back to that. But before we get back to that, how this all came to be, why don't you just start off by each introducing yourself, not by your title, but how you wish to be represented to the world?
Well, my name's Matt Haggman. First of all, thank you. It's so great to be with both of you. And thank you for bringing this all together, Leigh-Ann, and including us in this conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about this just because I feel like this is, these conversations we've all had together many, many times.
Yep.
Both privately, on panels, now on Zoom calls and stuff, right? And, but it's fun to be able to do this in this forum. And I think it's, at a moment like this during COVID, I think in some levels we're all kind of reevaluating, and reassessing. It's timely to be having this sort of conversation. So my background is, I was a journalist for 10 years, and loved being a journalist, but then wanted to be sort of in a more proactive role, trying to drive change. And I'm particularly doing it here in Miami, originally from Boston, Academia. And why I did that, to go to your question of how we want to represent, to have ourselves sort of seen and represented, is being in a role where you can help sort of be of and part of the community, but be in a role where you can play a role in trying to lift it up in different ways, to be able to think of ourselves in new and different ways that hopefully will prompt us to act and do in different ways. And so, that was what led, when I went to Knight Foundation, I had this role to literally, I think I've told you guys what's the story, the CEO at Knight Foundation, Alberto Barkman, said, go talk to people for 4 months and come back and tell us what we should do in Miami.
Yep.
Sort of this blank canvas. And came back and said, look, I think this is real opportunity around entrepreneurship, but particularly around building an ecosystem of resources to help entrepreneurs across the community sort of build the ideas and solve the problems most important to them. And what this quickly evolved into was just trying to build a vehicle to allow for economic development that ultimately just propelled a very narrow part of the population, even though you might have some broad metrics that show growth. That ultimately is not success. Yeah. And what I quickly tried to take all of our efforts at Knight Foundation and working, with both of you, is around making this of the entire community and seeing that innovation is built on diversity of people and ideas connecting, colliding, that the different life experiences, the different personal experiences, the different issues and challenges we face all coming together. The more people we have in the process of innovating, the more success will be and the more innovative we'll be.
Yeah.
And so that work is what, I guess, a long way of saying, how would you represent yourself and what would you want to be? I guess that's a long way of saying this.
So I'm going to give you the short way of saying it. I would say you're just a facilitator of change.
I'm honored to have that.
It came to me as your...
Thank you.
So Felecia, who are you and how do you represent yourself to the world?
I would say when you immediately said that, it's being able to be the biggest return on like my ancestors' sacrifices is what I hope I'm doing, right?
Yep.
And then helping other people do the same thing is how I want to be represented in the world, or the work to be represented. I wear a lot of hats, so mom too.
Yes.
Wife, and I run an organization now called the Center for Black Innovation, and a speaker, right?
Yep.
So working with a lot of companies and tech companies and helping them kind of increase their peak performance, but then also helping them be, I think, much bigger about what innovation and inclusivity means in their organizations. But at the end of the day, like, I like to be home and I like to read books, and I have learned some really hard lessons about what it means when either people doubt you or you doubt yourself. And so at the core of all of it, I'm just trying to help people not go through all the pain that I went through to learn those lessons, so that they can get out of life everything that they truly deserve because they worked for it.
Yeah, I think, and I want to get into when you doubt yourself, and people doubt you in a moment. But if I had to describe you, I would just say you unlock innovation potential in people and organizations.
Love that.
I mean, that's what you do through speaking, through thought leadership, through research, and also through the relationships. You're really a relational person. So what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to push you guys to go outside of your org hats and into your vulnerability space.
Let's do it.
So this should be fun. And what I want to talk about with you both is this process of defining who is an innovator, both in your individual lives, but also thinking about those that you are supporting, both facilitating change in a community and unlocking innovation potential. And I think we were talking about this before the camera started rolling, about where this all came from. And it started for me with you. When I was interviewing for the role at Venture Cafe, and you were gracious enough to really help me intentionally prepare for that, which I probably mentioned this, but I really appreciated that, because I honestly wasn't sure if I would get the job. And I was like, I'm going to practice so I can go to Google. This was like my main intention, but I also didn't have the confidence that I could do this on my own, that I could now, 5 years in, we've connected 50,000 innovators, collaborated with about 1,000 organizations, and really, I think, helped to catalyze a lot of collaborative energy in the community in a really unique way. But that moment, and I read about this in the book, is where your colleague said, why should they hire you? What do you know about innovation? And that made me it spiraled into this imposter syndrome around, I'm not an innovator. So I say all that to say, how do you define an innovator is really my first question. I'll start with you, Matt, and then go to you, Felecia. Like, what is your definition of an innovator?
Sure. So number one, thinking back to that meeting, it's so interesting to hear I don't know if we had actually talked about this part of the meeting.
No.
That you were feeling nervous about this, because the background was they had asked me ahead of when we spoke, who should we hire? And I had one name. I said Leigh-Ann Buchanan. That's it. So we sat down for that meeting. I was like, this is in the bag. We're just sort of talking through this. So it's so interesting to hear that, which honestly I can really relate to, that inner voice that we're going to talk a lot more about that. But it's so interesting to hear that, and thinking about that I thought that this was all set. The definition of the word innovator is built on an ability to be able to constantly think anew, and be able to constantly sort of take in and be open to new information from all sorts of people. Yep. I mean, innovation is built on being sort of this, having this ability to constantly be able to hear and listen very closely and carefully, and then to be able to then take that into interesting and productive places.
And then I guess the follow-up question for you, Matt, is, are you an innovator?
It's interesting when you ask me, do I, am I an innovator? I mean, honestly, it feels like sort of this lofty title that I feel reluctant to assign to myself. But if you were to ask me to sort of look at, everyone here in this room, or go outside. And I would say literally every person is an innovator, because I think we all have the ability to think about our world around us, to think about sort of the problems we're confronting and how things could be done differently. I mean, after all, most sort of entrepreneurial, innovative ideas come from an experience in your own life. Some problem that you've encountered that you're thinking, God, there's got to be a better way to do this. And thinking about what that might look like, that's innovation. And I think that's a skill that everyone has.
So then why are you psychologically divorced from the term or label innovator? I'm curious. I want to unpack that. Like why? Yeah. Like why is there this psychological distance in your identity?
Yeah, because I just feel like it's sort of a description and a title I feel comfortable giving to others.
Describing, yeah.
But I just wouldn't want to ascribe to myself.
Interesting. We're coming back to this. So Felecia, how do you define innovator? And then I guess the follow-up question is like, are you an innovator?
Yeah, so I define it as a new way of doing things. And I know for some people, they may feel that's a very oversimplified ways of doing it, but it is oftentimes just that, right? And because I work with people and communities that often feel completely disconnected from being able to own that they are innovative in their approaches, I've always had to oversimplify it because I'm like, literally it's that, right? And so like my grandmother, who grew up in like the country part of Jamaica.
Which part?
Trelawney.
Oh my God, you people from Trelawney.
I've watched her compost for years. And people probably would never call her an innovator, but then here in the United States, she'd probably win some sort of green award, right?
Yeah.
I've watched her do things to save water, collecting rainwater, being very responsible with the use of it. And here that's water conservation. Like there's all these things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why is it that my grandmother in Jamaica is doing all these things to be very conscious of the earth? But no one would ever, they would call her grandmother, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of it. Or say like she's doing these things because of poverty. I'm like, actually, no. And so if she is doing those things, but here, if you're doing it, you're getting all these honors and accolades and people are bestowing upon you, like we have to be able to look at the full breadth of how people show up, what they do, and say like, that's a new way of doing things. I think the other part of that is, and what I've had to come to learn is like, who am I waiting on to bestow something on me that I already do as a way of doing work, and I can actually see the fruits of my labor, right? And so when Matt said that, I was just like, come on, Matt. No, like honestly, and it's not gaslighting. It's literally like I've watched you architect like Miami startup ecosystem.
Yes,
like,
yes,
for real,
yes.
Right? And if it wasn't for you going on that listening tour for 4 months and saying, this is the thing, I don't know where Miami would be in the grand scheme of everything that's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, if you can look and see all these people are innovators, and I played the role in mapping out or pulling resources or saying, this is the new direction, like you are an innovator, right? And so I think sometimes if we're not doing the things, or it's not high tech, or you're not like solving whatever crazy algorithm, like if it's not that doesn't mean that it's any less innovative, right? You're changing, you're having an impact that, yes, I think on the flip side of that, you may not even see the impact of the work that you're doing as an innovator in your lifetime. Like we've had, like Martin Luther King did not see the equity that he wanted in his lifetime, but he was such a visionary and an innovator to say, I'm going to continue to wake up and do this every single day, and hopefully like this will happen. But now looking back, would anyone not say he's not a civil rights leader? Even though he was widely not popular. Right. Like black churches did not want him in his churches. Black people largely did not agree with him because he was shaking things up so much, it made them uncomfortable. But now, like no one would say that this man was not an innovator, a visionary, a civil rights leader, and paid the ultimate sacrifice for doing that. And so that's my long-winded answer.
So I guess the question is, are you an innovator?
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you know that? And when did you come into that identity, and how did you know that?
honestly, for years, I felt like Matt, right? Like, who am I to even say that?
Yeah.
Who am I to own that? I have built companies, right? I've built people. For a long time, I wouldn't even say that either. Yeah, I feel like we're doing good work. But I am, mostly because I have to be.
Which has a lot to do, and I guess like unpacking this, like the audacity to innovate and how that worked for you.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like I can't sit here and say I want to increase the innovation potential of Black people, and I don't believe the innovation potential of myself. And I can't look at what I've created and say, these are new ways in which I have solved problems. And if I deem that the definition of innovation for other people, why can't I acknowledge that within myself, right?
Yeah.
And so I think at its core, it's definitely that. But then also literally spending years of saying, I'm not an innovator. Like, how dare I do that? I don't have this kind of experience, but I have this kind of experience, right? And I think Catherine Finney, who founded Digital Undivided, in her letter last year when she was saying, I'm leaving, mostly to say I'm leaving philanthropy because philanthropy doesn't deserve me.
Yeah.
Everyone should go read it. But something that she said in there was just like, I've built things and I will build again.
Yeah.
And it was just that level of confidence of saying, even if no one else around me believes that, I have shown that I can build something, and I'm confident enough that even if I have to go back and start from ground zero, that confidence of that skill set, that background, and that impact, I can build again. And that is innovation at its core as well. It's just like that faith of saying, I can do this, we can do this, and we'll continue to do this despite anything else around it. But like, I have to be rooted and grounded in knowing that I have everything in me to be able to do that again.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So any situation, I know I have this within me.
Yeah.
That I can do that, whatever it might be. I can figure out my world around me and do what I need to do and think anew and do differently.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that speaks to a couple of points that I wanna roll into. The first of which is, in the book I talk a lot about this concept of capacity capital, and we've talked a little bit about this on our spot day. Which a lot of times when we think about capacity, it is so binary. It is all about going through a linear way of acquiring skills. And it is not thinking about skills as a manifestation of natural superpowers or talents, zone of genius. You talk a lot about that. And when I think about your innovator identity, we're gonna unpack Matt's real quick. It's this idea that part of what you can do in terms of the innovative output, that unique value you're adding to the world, that hopefully will effectuate change incrementally or en masse, is having knowledge, like true knowledge of yourself, and really stepping into your powers, like your superpowers, and how that is often the root of your innovation identity and the best things you're able to create. So my long-winded question is really a way of asking, what are your superpowers? If you had to name your top 3 superpowers, Felecia, we'll start with you.
I need to go first.
I don't think you know who's watching this, that this is all like off the cuff. Like, we're going to be talking about X, Y, and
No.
sit down.
Yeah.
What is my
What are your top 3 superpowers? I think you always have more than one, and they work well together, like a trifecta.
Because I do zone of genius work, and I like teach it, like being a solutions-driven communicator is one of my superpowers.
Yeah.
I own that. I acknowledge that. I also know where it takes me. So that would definitely be one. I would say being able to like pull back and sometimes see the best in people, oftentimes before they see it in themselves, and then helping them get there.
Yep.
Is a superpower as well.
Yeah.
Oh man. I don't know. My other one is like a funny one. Like I know where all the best desserts are. Like it's that in a way that I help bring joy to people in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Desserts just happen to be a way to do that. And I say that only because when people come to town, like I'm going to take you to the best possible desserts. And I want you to
Ice cream.
The alcohol ice cream. I know where to find it. Like let me like show you to the plug. I'd be a little, facetious, but it's just like those would be the 3 that come off the top.
I think, it's in honing in on that. It's funny, in the book I have these exercises around like, how do you get to that one word? we share one, which I think is communication. For me, like I'd say communication, connection, and strategy.
Yeah.
But I think for you, yes, joy is one of them. And I think part of what I've seen you develop over the last couple of years, where you have said no to the burnout, is really like stepping into the natural, like, cultivation of joy, which I think is one of your superpowers for sure.
Almost like I don't take life that serious.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of like putting it together with the joy. It's just like, I still feel there's happiness in every moment.
Yeah.
And you do not, like, you don't have to take life. Like, there's a lot to laugh at in life, even under a global pandemic. Like, you can find moments of joy, and kind of channeling back to like your childhood self. Like, I believe that in my heart of hearts. And so,
So Matt, same
My
question.
turn.
Your three. What are your three superpowers?
So by the way, just as it's a nice going second.
I'm trying to like make it equitable.
So number one, I would say resilience. Just having the ability to just keep going, know that after a difficult time, difficult day, that next morning getting up and being able to start anew, and to stick with it, just to keep at it. Number two, I would say just a love of people. And people's own stories, right? I mean, I love being a reporter because I love to sit and interview people. When I was a candidate, my favorite part of being a candidate was when I go knock on doors and meet people at their homes, at their doorstep, and talk about what's on their minds, their hopes, their fears, their concerns, all of it. And so I can't get enough of that. I mean, if I could spend my whole day just interviewing people about their story, I would love that. That would be a great day. And I guess the third thing is, while hopefully operating with, humility and respect and all that, is a confidence that, can get there. Do you know what I mean? It's just that, with some things I've done, there's sort of a time limit. So it's like, time's up. Like when I was a candidate. Again, this gets us off the innovation stuff, but a lot of the same challenges in a way. I remember at the end of that experience, I remember it was like at this thing, like 2 weeks left, and I was talking to this group, and I was like, man, I've unlocked this. I figured this out. I figured out how to do this, how to feel comfortable with things, how to talk about it, how to all this stuff. But then it's sort of like time's up, right? There's no, delaying product launch. In this context when you're a candidate, right? And so, but nevertheless, what that did taught me is just that have that confidence you can get there.
Yeah.
And so, and whether it's at night or remember times as a journalist, there were times and it was like, career-wise and stuff I was doing was like, but it was like deep down, I felt like we're gonna get there. We're gonna figure this out.
You are indeed an eternal optimist. I want to talk a little bit about power, political power. And not just, and we can talk in the political sense, because I don't think your candidacy is divorced from your nature as an innovator. I think that they're so closely aligned. And it's funny, I remember when you called me and we had that first conversation, you're like, I'm gonna do this thing and can I count on you? And I was like, yes. How do we launch this startup? Because I always saw the campaign as a startup. It was very much a startup. But I guess I've been thinking a lot about power. Political capital is what I talk a lot about in the book. And I know it seems not to be something that you think about in terms of innovation, but I think it's so important when we think about what informs our identity. And I guess where I'm going to is, so MLK talked about the fact that power is nothing more than the ability to achieve purpose so that you can effectuate social, economic, and political change. And when I hear that definition, to me, the first thing that comes to mind is innovators. Like, those are the people that when they wield the power, or when they just go take it for themselves through something that they're doing that disrupts the status quo, they are then able to achieve real meaningful change. And so I guess the question that I have is, how have you seen power play a role in shaping the very thing that you are innovating and also who you are as an innovator? Power structures that you've run up against, power structures that you have disrupted, power structures that you have become perhaps disenchanted with and realize that this is clearly not the way we should be doing things. I'll start with you, Felecia, and then I'll go to you, Matt.
I think there's definitely two coins to power. There's kind of power for good and power for bad.
Yep.
And you don't get to do business in Miami without going through or being stopped by the power for bad. Right?
Yes.
And it's just, and that's reflective of every city, but I think Miami, it's very unique, right? So there's that. I think personally having to understand power better, become powerful, and then wield that power so that you can actually effectuate change has been a really hard lesson to learn, right? Like I remember first starting out, like we didn't realize that there were supposedly some rings that we were supposed to kiss in order to do this work. Did not understand it at all. And those were some really hard lessons because we were just like, why is this work so hard? Oh, because we didn't go through the normal process, that we didn't even know the process existed, but we offended people in the process of not going to them and figuring out other ways to make it happen because we did not know there was a process, right? And so like that makes it difficult because it's so convoluted and crazy. You're just like, what is this? And then when you're talking about being able to impact people and getting to decision makers that sometimes make the process really hard to even get to them to get a decision made. Having to figure that part out. You talk a lot about raising your social capital. I think that goes hand in hand with power. Having to raise your social capital so that you get the respect of the person that needs to make the decision so that you can do your work. All of this sounds crazy, like it just does. But that is the lesson that we had to learn. And we came up against a lot of really difficult situations in which to be able to do that. And so trying to lessen that load for other people, but then also really kind of training people like, this is how you become more powerful. These are the boards that you have to join. These are the advisory councils that you need to be on so that you can start building these relationships, because we just happen to be in that kind of environment here in South Florida. Is something that we teach and kind of help people fully understand, because at the end of the day, you do need to personally own your power. But I think because, especially if you're talking about Black community, you're talking about generations of erasing, not feeling powerful at all, to the point that you don't even know how to spell the word. Like you're so far removed from what power means, but you know how power has affected you and stopped you, and kind of moving towards this point of like, hey, I can actually be powerful and I can use it for good. And this is a new way of being able to disrupt that. Because I think Matt and I had a conversation last year, or maybe I think right after your campaign, and it was just around that. And it was just like, I can't remember the conversation completely, but almost like, do you feel like you need to be in office to affect change and be powerful? I think you were actually asking me that question. And we had that conversation. And I was just like, at the time, I was just like, I think that there are so many other ways to be influential and be powerful and be impactful that are outside our kind of political climate, but that also is scary, right? So yes, it creates some opportunities that I think are gonna disrupt some things, but it's also scary where you're just like, our political climate is so unfair and so weirdly tilted that everything outside is becoming much more influential than what we hope and expect of our political institutions. And that's positive from a tech, like we're always gonna spin it on the tech and innovation side to be positive, but that's also scary about who we're putting into office and what are they stopping, how are they stopping the progress from happening?
It's interesting that you talk about that power and politics is so intertwined, and I'm curious if you think about, I guess where I'm going with this is when I think about politics, there was this ideal that political power and political structures were designed to represent everybody. And that when you have trust, confidence, and transparency in the offices, whatever they may be, that the influence that they are able to wield by virtue of that political position is supposed to be for good. As you mentioned, like for bad or for good. And I wonder, going to Matt now, how you begin to define the intersection between power and politics and what that means to the innovator, right? Having sought office, political office, but also understanding, at least from your role as a journalist and also at night, how those decisions impact the innovator journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm an innovator, but if I'm being honest with you, I couldn't always call myself an innovator. I've spent the better part of a decade launching and leading projects designed to help everyday people access their innovation potential. It's included projects that have unlocked over $75 million for things that bridge gaps in access, opportunity, and equity. When I transitioned from being a trial attorney to leading organizations in the innovation space, what I really needed was a guide to help me answer two critical questions. Am I an innovator? And what type of innovator am I? The problem is that our society and our own identity serve as barriers to keep our powerful potential as innovators locked away and hidden. Innovation Currency is the book that is designed to help you discover your hidden innovator. If you've ever wondered what innovation looks like for you, how you might use innovation in your day-to-day life, or how you can use innovation to help solve some of the most pressing challenges in the world, or even your workplace or community, then please grab your copy of Innovation Currency, because I can assure you that after reading it, you'll have the tools, the experience, and the translatable skills to unlock your hidden innovator. To find out where you can purchase your copy in whatever format makes sense for you, scroll down to the show notes for the appropriate links.
I mean, number one, I think it's important in a conversation like this to acknowledge, my profile is one where I've been dealing from a position of power the whole way. White, male, had the benefit of, parents who would pay for my college, go up to college and all of that. And so for sure coming from a place where I have all kinds of advantages that most people don't. And that's the reality, right? And when I joined Knight Foundation after being a journalist for 10 years, one of the things that I wanted to be really conscious of was not only sort of my own profile, but in a role like that at night, that, you're up on a 33rd floor in this office building in downtown Miami, and you're supposed to be connected and sort of and by for, part of the community, right?
With $12 an hour parking.
Right? There's just huge disconnect. And I think in part it starts with recognizing, right? And then being very, very intentional about how you do that. I mean, I'll never forget a story that when, right when I took the job, I was talking to my mom about it, and she said, my mom, had run a center for at-risk families and teen moms. And I used to go after school, spend afternoons there, up in Boston. And I remember she said to me, and so she'd gone through the whole experience of going to foundations, seeking money, and just the power differential and those sort of conversations. And she said, now you're a suit, right? She said, which is true. I had to go buy suits, I was in the journalist center. She said, but remember the things that made you a good reporter. You're out in the community. You're meeting people where you are, right? You're in the neighborhood. And so you need to take that into your role at Knight Foundation. And so I tried to do that. And I think in doing that, though, I had to then quickly become aware of where were, in terms of power, political power, where were those barriers that you then had to address, right? And so particularly around all the work around trying to build an ecosystem that is of and for the entire community, particularly dealing with issues of race and gender. What quickly became apparent was it's just sort of saying, hey, everybody's welcome. That doesn't work. I mean, at least that was my insight. I'd be curious what your feelings. But instead it was being really intentional, right? And that comes from, though, being aware, I think, of, at least the way I went about it at night, was being aware of where those sort of that political power lies and where those barriers are, that you need to then knock down those barriers. Right? And so being really conscious, right, and listening really closely and being really aware to where those barriers are. But it was interesting. Then when I became a candidate, I was thinking, Felecia, when you're talking about how when you're launching, I don't know if it was Code Fever or Black Tech Week or which, but when suddenly people were like, you didn't talk to me. When I was a candidate, a whole new world, politics. Suddenly, right, I thought, I'm trying to reach out to everybody. And then it comes back that there were people who were like, I get a call that so-and-so said you didn't call them, and they're unhappy about that. I'm like, wow.
You're like, how am
Wait
I
a second,
supposed to-
right? And so those things are hard, and so it's just having to, but again, I think it goes back to constantly sort of being really aware of, and then aware those barriers are, the friction points are, and then working as quickly as you can to try and address them. But it's hard.
And I think the interesting thing about that, like there's so many, pitfalls and things you need to navigate around this question of kind of political capital and power, that it also makes me realize how important relationships are. Because I find, who and we know this, Miami is more than a what city, it is a who city. More than any other place that I've done programs across the country. I know you have, I can drop in a city and get something done. Miami, not welcoming, but superficially, if I'm being honest, right? And then even when you get to the level where I think we all have the privilege to be at, where people maybe know who we are, or when you send an email, it gets answered, that's not accessible to everybody. Like I always said that I wanted, the Venture Cafe platform that I've had the privilege of leading to be a place where we're redistributing social capital, because I recognize that I have had the privilege of being in rooms at Night Foundation, not just like the open community breakfast, but the closed rooms where we're really having deep conversations about things that most people aren't having. Same with you. And I have had the privilege of accessing, let's be real, like we both raised $1 million, like individually from philanthropic organizations, but like that's not normal. Like that is not the norm. And so I think I want to talk a little bit for a moment about this idea of how we think about relationships, but like the real of relationships as innovators. And you're still an innovator, Matt, even though you won't call yourself one. Like what have you learned about relationships as a tool of your innovator identity? And I think secondly, what have those relationships taught you about yourself?
To me, as I said earlier, of sitting talking to people and building relationship and understanding their story and their concerns and their fears, aspirations, and all that, I love that.
Yeah.
Right. And so the process of relationship building is one that I really enjoy, and I'm fortunate that it just has felt kind of intuitive. I like it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And certainly, and in the Miami context, I really enjoyed it because it's such a dynamic environment, right? Like I always feel blanch a little bit when people say, "Oh, Miami's a small town, everyone knows everyone." Maybe going to this idea of who you know, right?
Yeah.
Because my experience has been that when people say that, my thought is, well, look around, because actually there are way more people in this environment because it's such a dynamic environment, right? And so the need to, in terms of relationships, to keep reaching out.
Yeah.
Never feel like sort of everyone in the room, like we got it covered, right? And so, and that's been a lesson, particularly for Miami, for me, is that this is not sort of this small town where everyone knows everyone. In fact, there are all these other people, and you need to be reaching out to those people and making yourself available to engage with those people. And so, and to me, just what's been just personally beneficial for me is that I enjoy that, right? I really like that. And so, but it's a process to me that is just ongoing and need to keep doing that.
So I guess my question follow-up is, what has been a pivotal relationship for you? Non-familial, not Danette, she doesn't count. But what has been a pivotal, like, I hate to use the word professional, because in the book I talk about non-familiar relationships that are both intimate and that are built on trust and shared values. And so I guess what I want to understand from you, Matt, it comes naturally, we know this, but what has been one of the most pivotal relationships in terms of your social capital?
So there've been lots, but to cite one person, it would have to be Alberto Bartman. So I'd been here in Miami about a year and a half, less than 2 years. Didn't know a single person when I got here. Brand new place. And with my then girlfriend, Danette, was invited to this reception. And we're seated at this table, And that was here. Someone was right here where you were, and there was Alberto, who was then the publisher at the Miami Herald. And I had come here to work in my first job in journalism ever, to work at a small paper called the Daily Business Review. Right?
Yes.
And so, but I had this thought, well, if you're going to be in Miami and you're going to work as a journalist, go work at the Miami Herald, right?
Yeah.
And this is all the way back in 2002. We started talking, and he was just super engaging. And I remember then he was asking questions, and just his engaging self.
Yeah.
And he got up to I don't know, he's going like the buffet to get some food or get a drink or something. And I turned to that and I said, well, I guess this is my chance. And so I got up and walked over to him and said, Mr. Barguin, I want to come work for you. And, and he had a great answer. He said, well, let's get to know each other. And I said, okay, let's get to know each other. And so then we had breakfast, and then one thing led to another. And then, as always, interview processes feel like they take way longer than they should. But nevertheless, then one thing led to another, and I was working at the Miami Herald. Then we fast forward, as I'm a reporter at the Herald for almost 8 years. And then I get a call. I got an email first from Manny Diaz saying, you ready for your next thing? And it was a job description for program director at the Knight Foundation. My first response was, what's a program director? And so got an email about this role at Knight Foundation, where Alberto had moved over as the CEO. And then, and it's funny how these things go. At first it says, I'm happy what I'm doing, even though you're thinking, what's that next thing? And I was actually Javi Soto, then at Miami Foundation, called up and said, hey, you should think about this. This is an opportunity. And I said, okay. And so then the recruiter who was talking to folks, remember, sat down for breakfast. He said, would you be willing to leave Miami Herald, do something else? I remember I said, yes. But I said it in a way, I'm like, man, I hope he believes me, because I'm not sure. Right? And so, but then one thing led to another, and then I was there sitting again with Alberto talking about joining Knight Foundation, which I then did. So that relationship, right? You think both Miami Herald and Knight Foundation, there were other folks who were obviously part of that, particularly going to Knight Foundation too. But at the end of the day, that was Alberto. Yeah. And so as a pivotal professional relationship, and someone who's who is a friend, that would be it.
I'm going to ask the same question to you, Felecia, but I also want to elevate what I think we don't take time to realize, which is I hate the term networking.
Oh, me too.
Because it is so transactional.
Yeah.
And when you think about the relationships that not only unlock opportunity for you, they are those that are cultivated intimacy. It is not just I meet you and then you give me a job. It is, I think about our relationship. We met through NLC. We've been to coffee, lunch.
I remember our first breakfast.
Do you?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Was it when we talked about this? Anyway, I remember when we met one time, and I think we met and talked about Nia Project.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I want to talk about financial capital before we wrap up our conversation. But Nia Project would not exist without Matt Haggman. But you really wouldn't, because I had this crazy idea that I was going to take kids from over town to Ghana, West Africa, to teach them about leadership. And we didn't have, nobody who wants to pay for Black kids to travel across the world to get exposure. And Matt wrote us our first check. And that was the gap that you said, how much do you need? And I said, well, I need X amount, because this is what I budgeted to get them over there. And he was the one that took the first risk. But
you know why? I mean, obviously it's a great idea and all of that, but there are a lot of great ideas out there. It was you. I mean, that's the truth, right? And it just goes to, how leadership is so important, and having, and all the stuff you're talking about, the confidence and all of that. I mean, that all came across, and it was like, if there's anyone I'm going to bet on, it's this person.
Wow.
The same with Felecia. I mean, it's just, so know that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I want to talk a little bit about this idea of capital. But first, who was your Alberto?
That.
Oh.
And seriously, not gaslighting. I would say that even if he wasn't here, but in two occasions, right? So the first time I met Matt, and I don't know if Matt remembers this, but it was TEDx Miami. And me and like my speaker coach, I can't remember her name, I probably shouldn't say her name, but did not get along. And I got on that stage, I knew what I wanted to say. At the time we were still running Feverish, and we had this like youth program called Poppreneurs, and we were like, teaching kids entrepreneurship with like popsicles, and they were running their own business and all of that. They funded trips to like go ski in Colorado, and like they couldn't find jobs, right? It was the whole thing. And I remember, I don't remember if it was the rehearsal day or like the day of, and like I got up there and like was forgetting lines and like stumbling over words, and it was the rehearsal day, and Matt came up to the stage and was like, "You look more comfortable or more confident than you actually probably feel right now." And like I got back, and then like I was able to like go through and it was, you probably don't remember because it was such a simple thing that you said, but it's grounded me, it centered me. It was also when someone sees something in you or believes you, or you're just like, calm down, like you're okay, right?
Yeah.
So that was it. And then even with Code Fever, like there were so many people to this day that I sit in front of, like, you literally did not believe in us 7 years ago. And it was a lot of that. Like people just did not care about Black people being in tech and in Miami. They didn't care about kids either, right? Like, and the conversation we had with Matt, he's like, he believed it, he understood it, and then he put his money where his mouth is. And those things are really, really, really important. And so, you know, it's interesting because sometimes as Black women or people, like, you want to point to like the Black woman that made an impact on your life, open doors, but like it's a white guy, right? Like not to say like you're, but like Matt was literally it, and I would be irresponsible if I didn't say that, because it's the truth, right? And everything that came out of that started with someone like truly saying like, I get this. Because I think oftentimes when you have ideas, and people are always just like, oh, you like, it's about you believing in that. I'm like, yeah, that's true. But you also need outside validation to know that you're not crazy. Like, you have a crazy idea, yes, but you in fact are not crazy, because other people understand the journey or the story or what you're trying to go, even if you don't have it all completely figured out. And that's such an important role that actually a lot of people don't play. You know, it's so much easier to say like, oh, I'll stand on the sidelines and wait till they fuck up, right? Or I'll stand on the sideline and wait and see. Like, someone else needs to be the first person in, the first check in, and then I'll come along. And yeah, that's I can respect that being some people's position, but I also like to call BS on that. Like, if you really truly believe in it, be the first person in.
I think that this is actually what I wanted to close out our conversation on, was this topic around investing. What does it mean? In the book, I talk a lot about financial capital, and it's not just about dollars. It's really about this idea that there are resources that come financially, because we know you need money, but other ways to think about getting the resources you need to take your idea and put it into action. And it's funny, when you talk about Alberto, like I've had some one-on-one conversations with Alberto, some interesting, like, you know, butting of heads over, you know, B Corps and structures, and just really nerdy conversations with Alberto. But I remember one experience when he was speaking at, I want to say it was the Ruth Shack Award, and he opened up the conversation with kind of giving a, you know, greetings. And he talked about Knight Foundation as providing risk capital for great ideas. And that has always stuck with me, because when I think about inclusive innovation, these innovators that represent everybody, when he talks about risk capital and great ideas, I recognize that we don't often have people willing to put in the risk capital. And by we, I don't mean you. I mean we. I mean for you to say, but you also, for you to say, I invested in you with this crazy ass idea of taking kids away. And then also, while it happened under someone else's watch, you began to plant the seeds to invest in what we were doing with Venture Cafe. I think that's so important. So I guess the last kind of question, well, second to last question that I really have for you guys is, why is it important to make investments in innovators that are diverse? Start with you.
Well, first of all, I'm just deeply honored, Felecia. It just means a lot. It's very, very, thank you. I think the evidence is clear. that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not, right? And in our cities and our neighborhoods and our cities, you know, around the world, we need to be thinking about this hard, because I mean, if you were to think of rank the problems to solve in the world,
Yeah.
I think you could probably make the argument this is number one.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't know if you want existential issues like climate change and what that means for communities, that might be, you know, on your, you know, your top 5 list, but I think you can make a case that this is number one.
Yep.
And to solve it, that requires investing in people. That requires the risk capital. That requires going out of our own sort of social circles that we might be in at any given moment, and taking risks and being willing to fail and willing to live lives that include failure, whether that's where we're in positions like it was at night where I could make these grants and some may not work out, but being willing to do that and not, you know, or that could be other cases where we're leading lives where we're willing to do things professionally, take on a job, a campaign, whatever it might be, where you know you might fail, right? And know that is part of it. And so I think ultimately it's sort of why it is important, because to me, I mean, unrealized potential. If we really want to drive innovation, right? I mean, if we're really sincere about wanting to drive innovation, it needs to be about our entire communities, our entire countries around the world, because the problems that each of us encounter in our daily lives, that's the nugget for the next idea. And if we're not creating pathways so that people can act on those ideas that they have, then that's a failing, right? And we're limiting innovation. And right now, I would argue, we're limiting it in a big, big way. And we've got a lot of problems to solve. So we need a lot more people enabled to be able to act on them.
I'm going to ask the same question of you, Felecia, but I also want to lift up this idea that when we think about innovation and innovators, it is so often focused on the output or the kind of labeling or the achievement as justifying the means. And when I think about innovation, I also think about the process, the journey that is inherently a social process, but more importantly, innovation is designed to address problems of the human condition. And I always think that we, billions of people on Earth, don't look like one particular moniker, which is, and not to be offensive, but like is a white man in Silicon Valley saying he's fixing the world through innovation. Like,
totally.
That is not the definition of who an innovator is and why we need to invest in them. But I want to go to you because this is your jam, unlocking the potential of innovators.
But there is a lot of privilege and luxury into funding the process, right? Especially as we talk about innovators, diverse innovators, Black innovators, like underserved, like all the titles, right? And there's that, and so I think even before you get to the core of that, it's just like there's all these things that you have to prove in order to be able to get the funding that you need to actually start solving the problem. And there's a process always to solve the problem, right? And so that is part of it. Like, that's a big part of it, right? It's trusting Black people to solve Black problems, but making sure that you're either not getting in the way or giving the respectable amount of funding for what it actually truly takes to solve the problems, right? And so often we see, like, even like City Foundation and Echo and Green came out with the report, like, and even to start to touch the hem, like Danielle, it says like the hem of like actual financial equality in this country, it's gone to $16 trillion just to begin to touch it. And so, but then on the same breath, we talk about innovators like bootstrap that, right? Or like your innovation is actually just like you being able to do this for free or with no money to get to a point where we say, okay, you've proven it, you've deemed yourself worthy. Like all of these things that like just have never sit well with me, right? Or just the fact that we even skirt around like the financial part of solving problems, but we understand that in corporate America, right? We understand what we put money towards means that we're so seriously trying to solve this problem and that we're gonna measure it year over year because we put money to it, we'll put time, attention, and resources. And then when we talk about innovators, specifically Black innovators, then it's just like, actually, no, you don't need money. Like, what do you need money for? What? what do you need money for? And I'm just like, what do you mean?
Right.
Like, what are you talking about? And that's hard because, yeah, the money also serves as a bit of a validation, like, hey, someone trusts me enough to be able to solve this problem in the way that it can. And so the financial part is a big part of that. But then like failure capital is also important too, right? And so it's just like giving the money with no strings attached, or not saying like, hey, if you fuck up, we're not funding the 10 other innovators that look like you that come looking for money, because we need you to be all things to everyone, and like leverage this out there. Like I can go on and on because there's just so many different layers to what we've either personally dealt with or what we've seen other people that we work with do with or have dealt with, just to get the funding that they need. And no matter how it comes, because it comes in so many different ways, but this like direct conversation around like, no, this is how much it costs to solve that. And if you don't fund it at that level, do not expect the quality in which needs to happen in order to make that happen, or the resources or the impact, like all of those things.
I think that, the best way to wrap up this conversation, particularly on this topic of financial capital, is really to think about this idea of how to fund equitably. And I always use the example of, I used to run track for about 100, 300 meter hurdles. I ran track, but if you think about the track and field, your starting blocks are never on the same line. You're never on the same line. You're running the same race, but you can't possibly start at the same place for it to be fair to everybody. And if you think about being more equitable in the allocation of financial capital to more diverse and inclusive innovators, we must also recognize that they're starting from different blocks, that 400 years plus of systemic racism has contributed to a different level of attainment, skill sets, ability to even go through that innovative process in a way that is traditionally validated by the powers that be, by the foundations, by the world. And that requires, to your point, more dollars to get them to the same starting point. I wish we could keep this conversation going, but we kept going. So I want to. I know. Yeah. But I want to thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Particularly you, Matt, at the last minute, and you, Felecia, for always just having these real conversations. So thank you.
Thank you for facilitating this conversation and for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh-Ann. This has been amazing. Thank you.